morning of January 15th, 1947, Los Angeles, a city of sun-drenched glamour and post-war dreams, woke to a nightmare that would scar its history forever. In a vacant, weed-choked lot south of downtown, a local housewife stumbled upon what she first mistook for a broken mannequin. It was not. It was the naked, surgically bisected body of a young woman, posed grotesquely, her mouth slashed into a gruesome smile. This victim would soon become known to the world as the Black Dahlia, her real name, Elizabeth Short. The murder was a paradoxical blend of savagery and precision. Whoever killed Elizabeth had not only ended her life, but staged her remains with a chilling, almost theatrical cruelty. As the police scrambled for answers, the city erupted in a frenzy of fear, scandal, and morbid fascination. The press descended like vultures, spinning a web of rumor and fantasy around Elizabeth's life, painting her alternately as a starry-eyed dreamer and a wayward temptress. Her murder became a national obsession, fueled by sensational headlines and whispered tales of Hollywood's dark underbelly. In the 78 years since her death, the Black Dahlia case has remained one of the most enduring mysteries of American crime history. Hundreds of suspects have been questioned. Dozens have confessed, but no one has ever been convicted. More than just a murder, the Black Dahlia case exposed uncomfortable truths about post-war American society. Its hunger for fame, its exploitation of women, its worship of beauty and destruction. This video will journey through the life and death of Elizabeth Short, meticulously reconstructing the investigation, the suspects, the media circus, and the cultural legacy left in the murder's bloodied wake. We will sift through fact and fiction, following the cold trail of a killer who may have been hiding in plain sight, or perhaps protected by forces too powerful to expose. Through careful examination, we aim not only to understand how Elizabeth Short died, but why her story refuses to be forgotten. The Black Dahlia's legacy is not merely a tale of violence. It is a dark mirror held up to a glittering world, showing how easily dreams can rot into nightmares, and how even in death a young woman could be silenced, yet endlessly spoken for. In the shadow of Los Angeles' sunny facade, her ghost lingers still, whispering secrets the city has never dared to answer. Before she became an infamous figure draped in myth and mystery, Elizabeth Short was simply a young woman chasing an American dream that too often eluded those without power, money, or protection. To truly understand the tragedy of the Black Dahlia, we must strip away the sensationalized headlines and examine who Elizabeth Short really was beyond the caricature that history often remembers. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters to Cleo and Phoebe Short. The early years of her life were marked by economic hardship and emotional turmoil. Her father, Cleo, abandoned the family in 1930 amid the Great Depression, faking his own suicide and leaving Phoebe to raise the children alone. The betrayal left deep scars in Elizabeth, shaping her longing for stability, affection, and perhaps even the glamour of a life far removed from her modest beginnings. As a teenager, Elizabeth struggled with asthma and bronchitis, prompting doctors to recommend a warmer climate for her health. She spent several winters in Miami and later moved to California, chasing both better health and brighter prospects. Like thousands of young women of her era, Elizabeth was drawn to the glitz and possibility of Hollywood. She dreamed of becoming a film actress, a dream that, though common, was no less poignant or sincere for its ubiquity. Accounts from those who knew Elizabeth paint a picture far more nuanced than the reckless party girl described in later media accounts. Friends and acquaintances remembered her as soft-spoken, courteous, and strikingly beautiful, with jet black hair, green eyes, and a taste for stylish clothing. Yet beneath her polished exterior, there was a persistent fragility. She often lived transiently, moving from city to city, from job to job, often relying on the kindness of friends, admirers, and acquaintances to provide shelter or assistance. She sometimes presented herself as more successful than she truly was, a small deception that spoke more to her yearning for a different life than to any real deceitfulness. Elizabeth's lifestyle, independent, mobile, and occasionally reliant on men for support, placed her at the fringes of a society that, in 1947, judged women harshly for stepping outside rigid expectations. After her death, these aspects of her life would be twisted into lurid myths of promiscuity and irresponsibility, none of which were conclusively supported by evidence. In truth, Elizabeth Short lived a life that was neither saintly nor scandalous, but heartbreakingly ordinary. A young woman adrift in a predatory world, hoping for better things. Despite her struggles, Elizabeth maintained a sense of dignity and ambition. She cherished the simple things: letters home to her mother, small jobs as a waitress or clerk, evenings spent with friends. She remained until the end an optimist, someone who believed that just over the horizon, success and happiness waited. Tragically, her belief in new beginnings would bring her into the heart of the city that would ultimately betray her. Elizabeth Short did not live to become a star. Instead, she became a cautionary tale, her real life eclipsed by a monstrous legend, to this day restoring her humanity, her dreams, her flaws. Her essential dignity is an act of resistance against the forces that once consumed and exploited her. On the morning of January 15, 1947, Los Angeles woke to one of the most horrific discoveries in American criminal history. In the Lambert Park neighborhood, a young mother named Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter along South Norton Avenue when she noticed what she initially thought was the discarded remains of a department store mannequin. It lay awkwardly in an empty lot between two houses, starkly visible against the winter brown grass. Curious, she approached and screamed. It was not a mannequin. It was a woman's body, gruesomely mutilated and posed in a way that seemed almost deliberate. Police were immediately summoned, and what they found stunned even hardened detectives. The victim, later identified as Elizabeth Short, had been severed cleanly in half at the waist, a surgical cut so precise that investigators initially suspected a person with medical or anatomical knowledge. Her body had been drained completely of blood, giving her skin a ghostly pallor. Both halves of her body had been posed. Her arms were bent at right angles, her legs splayed wide in a grotesque display. Her mouth had been slashed from ear to ear in what is now chillingly known as the Glasgow smile, creating a permanent, hideous grin. There were ligature marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, suggesting she had been bound and tortured before death. Deep cuts on her thighs and breasts indicated further brutal mutilation, and portions of her flesh had been removed. The sheer brutality and theatrical nature of the crime baffled detectives. This was not a frenzied killing. It was calculated, methodical, and cruelly artistic. It spoke to a perpetrator who was both clinically skilled and chillingly sadistic. Adding to the eeriness of the scene was the almost ritualistic cleanliness of the body. There was no blood at the location, suggesting Elizabeth had been killed elsewhere, carefully washed and transported to the vacant lot post-mortem. Police concluded that the body had been deliberately displayed in public, likely in the early hours of the morning. The media seized upon the horror with ravenous hunger. Headlines screamed of a sex fiend slayer, loose in the city. Reporters and photographers descended upon the scene before the forensic team could fully secure it, trampling evidence and contributing to what would later be called one of the worst-handled crime scenes in Los Angeles history. Almost immediately, police were flooded with calls, many from pranksters, some from citizens convinced they had seen something. Tip-offs, false confessions, and rumors flooded the LAPD's overwhelmed offices. Detectives began methodically piecing together Elizabeth Short's final days, but quickly realized they were facing a daunting task. Elizabeth's transient lifestyle, multiple acquaintances, and frequent moves across California meant hundreds of leads to chase, many of them dead ends. Within days, the LAPD turned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, to assist in identifying the victim. They sent Elizabeth's fingerprints to Washington, D.C., via sound photo and early form of fax machine. Amazingly, they received a match. Elizabeth had previously been arrested for underage drinking in Santa Barbara, providing authorities with a mugshot. The discovery immediately added fuel to the media firestorm. Sensationalistic portrayals of Elizabeth as a wayward, flirtatious woman dominated newspapers, feeding into public appetite for salacious details. Meanwhile, a chilling twist added another layer of horror. The Los Angeles Examiner newspaper received a mysterious phone call. The mail caller, who never identified himself, claimed he would soon be sending Elizabeth's belongings to the paper. Days later, a package arrived containing some of her personal items: her birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book with several pages torn out. Everything had been cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints, demonstrating the killer's cunning and familiarity with police procedures. The package confirmed one terrifying fact: the killer was watching, reading the papers, and taunting the authorities. In the days and weeks following the discovery, Elizabeth Short's murder would become an unstoppable media frenzy. Yet as detectives scrambled for answers, it became increasingly clear that the case was slipping away from them, lost in a sea of false leads, mishandled evidence, and the growing shadow of fear gripping Los Angeles. This was no ordinary murder. It was a message, but to whom and for what reason remains a riddle, etched in the blood-stained history of the Black Dahlia. From the moment Elizabeth Short's body was found, the Los Angeles Police Department faced a tidal wave of pressure, and they were immediately in over their heads. The brutal, public nature of the crime, combined with the frenzied media attention, meant that mistakes were inevitable. But no one could have foreseen just how disastrous the initial investigation would become. The LAPD assigned over 50 detectives to the Black Dahlia case, treating it as the highest priority. Captain Jack Donahoe, Chief of Detectives Thad Brown, and Lieutenant Frank Jemison were among those leading the charge. The entire homicide division was thrown into the case, alongside support from robbery, vice, and even juvenile divisions. But despite the sheer manpower, the investigation quickly became mired in confusion. One of the first and most critical errors occurred at the crime scene itself. In the rush to satisfy press demands and public curiosity, the scene was not properly secured. Reporters and photographers trampled through potential evidence areas. Witnesses wandered near the body before it was fully examined. Vital forensic clues, footprints, tire tracks, even blood traces were likely destroyed or contaminated in those first chaotic hours. Desperate for progress, the police began pulling in dozens of suspects, interviewing over 150 men in the first few days alone. Everyone from Elizabeth's casual acquaintances to complete strangers was questioned. Investigators pursued various lines of inquiry, each one promising hope but quickly fizzling into dead ends. Known associates. Men who had dated or befriended Elizabeth were scrutinized, but none had strong enough motives or alibis that placed them at the scene. Medical students and doctors. The clean surgical bisection suggested a perpetrator with medical knowledge. LAPD investigated local medical schools, surgical trainees, and physicians, but no strong suspects emerged. Hollywood connections. Given Elizabeth's proximity to aspiring actors in the film industry, rumors swirled that a powerful figure in Hollywood might have been involved. However, solid evidence was lacking. In an almost surreal twist, the Los Angeles Examiner became an active player in the investigation. When reporters learned Elizabeth's identity before her mother, they contacted Phoebe Short in Boston under false pretenses, telling her that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. Once they had secured as much personal information as possible, they revealed the truth. Her daughter had been murdered. This heartless manipulation highlighted how competitive journalism at the time crossed ethical boundaries in pursuit of sensational headlines. The newspapers also complicated the investigation by publishing every known detail about the case, sometimes even publishing false leads or wild theories to sell papers. In return, the killer, or someone pretending to be, seemed to enjoy taunting the media and police, sending letters and calling reporters. One cryptic note mailed to the Examiner read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." This continual media circus fueled public paranoia, further hindering police efforts. Citizens flooded the LAPD with hundreds of tips, many of them useless or outright fabrications. False confessions began pouring in, a trend that would plague the investigation for years. In total, more than 60 people would eventually confess to the Black Dahlia murder, but none of their stories fit the forensic evidence. Within weeks, the LAPD realized they were no closer to solving the case. Internal conflicts began to surface between officers, between departments, and between the police and the press. Detectives working night and day began to burn out. Leads grew cold, witnesses recanted, and the public's attention, once laser-focused on Elizabeth Short, began to wane as newer scandals and crimes captured the headlines. Despite hundreds of interviews and countless man-hours, the case was beginning to slip through their fingers. The Black Dahlia murder had all the makings of an unsolvable crime. A chaotic crime scene, an overwhelming media presence, too many suspects, and perhaps most dangerously, a killer smart enough to exploit all these weaknesses. The question was no longer just who killed Elizabeth Short, but whether the truth would ever be uncovered at all. In the wake of the chaotic investigation, the Black Dahlia case attracted an enormous number of suspects, some credible, most not. Over the years, the pool of suspects ballooned to more than 200 people, ranging from drifters to doctors to police officers themselves. Each theory added new layers of mystery and horror to the already nightmarish tale. One of the first serious suspects was Robert Manley, a 25-year-old traveling salesman who had known Elizabeth briefly before her death. Manley had given Elizabeth a ride from San Diego to Los Angeles on January 8, 1947, and even paid for her to stay at the Biltmore Hotel, the last place she was seen alive. Manley voluntarily submitted to multiple polygraph tests, lie detector tests which were crude at the time, and passed them. His alibi checked out, and no forensic evidence linked him to the murder. Eventually, police cleared him of suspicion, though his brief involvement with Elizabeth forever haunted his life. Another early person of interest was Mark Hansen, a wealthy nightclub and theater owner who had offered Elizabeth a place to stay in Los Angeles. Hansen's home was something of a haven for struggling young actresses. Some reports suggested that Elizabeth had rebuffed his romantic advances shortly before her death. Although he was never formally charged, some detectives and later theorists considered Hansen to be suspicious, or at least complicit in Elizabeth's tragic end. Pieces of her belongings had reportedly been found at his home, but there was no solid evidence tying him to the crime. Given the nature of the mutilation, the precision cutting of her body, the professional-grade dissection detectives and independent researchers alike believed the killer had medical training. This led to investigations into local doctors, surgeons, and medical students. One of the most enduring suspect profiles was that of a surgeon gone rogue, someone who possessed not only the skills to dismember Elizabeth, but also the psychological coldness to carry out such a monstrous act. Some theorists believed Elizabeth had been murdered by a jealous lover or someone obsessed with her. This narrative was attractive because it offered an emotionally fueled explanation for the horrific mutilation. However, Elizabeth's life was complex and transient. While she knew many men casually, there was little evidence she had any deeply entangled or dangerous romantic relationships. A darker and more cynical theory emerged, that the media had so thoroughly contaminated the investigation and sensationalized Elizabeth's life that the real killer was obscured in the noise. By this account, the true murderer might have slipped away unnoticed, hidden among the hysteria of false confessions, exaggerations, and fabricated details. Perhaps the most compelling and infamous suspect emerged decades later, Dr. George Hodel, Wendane. George Hodel was a wealthy and brilliant physician in Los Angeles, with deep connections to the city's elite. In 1949, he became the subject of an LAPD investigation, not directly because of the Black Dahlia case, but because he was suspected of sexually abusing his own daughter, Tamar Hodel. During the investigation, the LAPD even bugged Hodel's house with listening devices. Among the chilling recorded statements, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. This is the best payoff I've seen between law enforcement agencies." Although the LAPD considered Hodel a prime suspect, he fled to the Philippines in 1950, effectively avoiding further investigation. Hodel remained a controversial figure until his death. In the early 2000s, Hodel's own son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD homicide detective, conducted his own extensive investigation. In his best-selling book, Black Dahlia Avenger, Steve accused his father of being Elizabeth Short's killer. He pointed to the surgical skill, the timing of his father's movements, the disturbing tape recordings, and even paintings in Hodel's home that eerily resembled the mutilation of Elizabeth's body. Though Steve Hodel's theory is compelling and has many supporters, it has not been definitively proven. Critics argue that circumstantial evidence, psychological projection, and lack of direct forensic proof weakened the case. Some speculated Elizabeth crossed paths with organized crime figures and was killed either as retribution or as a symbolic warning. A few investigators posited that Elizabeth was the victim of an unknown serial killer operating in California during the 1940s, possibly connected to other unsolved murders such as the Cleveland torso murders. Each theory, each suspect, pulled investigators in new directions. And yet none of them, not George Hodel, not Red Manley, not Mark Hansen, were ever conclusively tied to the crime. The Black Dahlia murder remains a sinister black hole of possibilities, sucking in facts, rumors, and lives with no clear end in sight. The Black Dahlia murder was not just a brutal crime, it became a symbol of something much larger, the dark underbelly of American dreams. Elizabeth Short's death and the obsessive media frenzy that followed changed Los Angeles and American popular culture forever. In the 1940s, Los Angeles was a city shimmering with possibility. It was a land of movie stars, palm trees, and endless sunshine. Hollywood promised fame and fortune to anyone with enough beauty, charisma, or luck. But underneath that glamorous surface, there was a growing darkness, a city swelling with transplants, loneliness, corruption, and crime. Elizabeth Short came to embody this contrast perfectly. The beautiful dreamer, young, vibrant, chasing stardom. The tragic reality murdered, mutilated, and discarded like a ghost no one wanted to claim. Her death cracked the illusion of Los Angeles as a city of dreams and exposed it as a place where innocence could be exploited and destroyed. In a sense, Elizabeth became the first major martyr of Hollywood's broken promises. Before the Black Dahlia case, newspaper crime coverage had existed, but the Black Dahlia murder revolutionized it. Newspapers like the Los Angeles Examiner, the Herald Express, and others transformed Elizabeth Short into a character rather than a victim. They portrayed her as a party girl, a femme fatale, a mystery woman. They printed rumors and speculations about her love life, financial struggles, and supposed deceptions, often with little evidence. The sensationalist coverage fed the public's morbid fascination, and in doing so, created the modern template for true crime storytelling, a formula that still thrives today in books, podcasts, TV shows, and documentaries. The idea that the victim's personal life was almost as important as the crime itself began here. In short, the Black Dahlia murder taught media companies an enduring lesson. True crime sells. The 1940s and 50s saw the rise of film noir, a gritty, cynical genre characterized by femme fatale, corrupt cops, shattered innocence, fatalistic endings. While noir had begun to develop before Elizabeth Short's death, her murder seemed to bleed into its imagery. The deadly beautiful woman, the doomed city, the chilling mystery, these became tropes that noir movies and novels feasted on. Many believe that films like Sunset Boulevard, 1950, Double Indemnity, 1944, The Big Heat, 1953, echoed the real-life horror of Elizabeth's story. Ambition turning fatal, the dream factory becoming a nightmare machine. Even decades later, modern films like LA Confidential, 1997, and TV series like American Horror Story Murder House drew direct inspiration from the Black Dahlia case. Her ghost lingers, not just in crime files, but in the DNA of American entertainment. Over time, Elizabeth Short became more than a murder victim. She became a myth, a symbol of lost innocence, broken dreams, and a warning about the dangers that lurk behind glittering facades. Artists, musicians, and writers have invoked her image, sometimes respectfully, sometimes exploitatively. Novels like The Black Dahlia by James Elroy reimagined her story in complex, haunting ways. Bands like the Black Dahlia Murder named themselves after the case, blending horror with music. Portraits, murals, and exhibitions often depict Elizabeth Short as a beautiful, ethereal figure, frozen forever at 22 years old. Yet behind all the glamorization lies a real human tragedy, one that no amount of storytelling can sanitize. Elizabeth Short was not a myth. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman navigating a world that promised much and delivered little. In the end, the culture that promised her a place under the spotlight immortalized her in the cruelest way possible. Not through fame and fortune, but through endless, unsolvable death. Even though decades have passed since Elizabeth Short's brutal death, the Black Dahlia case has never truly gone cold in the minds of investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths. In fact, the advancements in forensic technology, new witness accounts, and the relentless obsession of some have kept the search for answers alive well into the 21st century. In the 1990s and 2000s, the Los Angeles Police Department revisited many of their oldest unsolved homicides, including the Black Dahlia. With new forensic technologies such as DNA profiling, fingerprint reanalysis, digital evidence archiving, there was a brief hope that some hard evidence from 1947 blood samples, fingerprints on the belongings mailed to the press, items from the crime scene could be re-examined with modern methods. However, serious challenges stood in the way. Lost evidence. Many of the physical evidence materials from the original investigation were missing or had degraded over time. Contaminated crime scene. The open display of Elizabeth's body had attracted crowds before police could seal the area. Early handling of evidence was sloppy by today's standards. Despite these hurdles, detectives kept the case officially open, holding out hope for a breakthrough. The internet ushered in a new era of true crime obsession. Web forums, Reddit threads, YouTube documentaries, and podcasts exploded with amateur detectives trying to piece together the Black Dahlia mystery. And then these citizen sleuths pored over autopsy reports, witness testimonies, newspaper archives, crime scene photos. Some of their theories were wild, others were surprisingly plausible. A few new names and scenarios even emerged, though none conclusively solved the case. Interesting notes. Digital forensic artists have tried to re-age witness sketches to better match possible modern suspects. DNA technology was proposed to test the stamps and envelopes sent to newspapers by the supposed killer, but DNA recovery was deemed too risky due to age and handling. One of the most persistent and controversial voices in modern Black Dahlia investigations has been Steve Hodel, son of prime suspect Dr. George Hodel. In addition to his first book, Black Dahlia Avenger, Steve continued to produce volumes of research suggesting that his father killed Elizabeth Short. George Hodel had murdered other women. There was a massive cover-up involving powerful friends and corrupt officials in 1940s Los Angeles. Steve Hodel even presented newly uncovered photographs from his father's belongings, suggesting one depicted Elizabeth Short herself, though this remains debated. He pushed for DNA testing on crime scene evidence still held by the LAPD, but bureaucratic resistance and the passage of time made this difficult. His core arguments. The surgical skill evident in the mutilation matched his father's background. George Hodel was already being secretly investigated by the LAPD in the late 1940s. Recorded statements captured by police surveillance linked George Hodel to the murder. While Steve's theory gained public attention and passionate followers, critics argue that emotional bias and lack of direct physical evidence weaken his case. In recent years, forensic genealogy, the same method used to catch the Golden State Killer, has offered a glimmer of hope for cold cases. In theory, if DNA could be extracted from the Black Dahlia evidence, letters, stamps, the purse found near the body, genealogical databases could help identify a suspect or relative. However, this remains speculative. The handling of evidence from 1947, plus the legal hurdles around accessing genealogy databases, make this an uphill battle. Some forensic experts have also proposed using digital 3D modeling of the crime scene, advanced imaging of old evidence, AI analysis of witness reports and timelines, to create a clearer picture of the days leading up to Elizabeth's death. While these tools are promising, no definitive results have yet been announced. Even if the Black Dahlia killer is long dead, solving the case holds deep meaning. Justice for Elizabeth Short, whose life was exploited both in death and in the decades that followed. Closure for history, putting an end to the endless speculation. A victory for truth, proving that even the most daunting cold cases can eventually be solved through persistence, technology, and human determination. The haunting image of Elizabeth Short smiling, bright-eyed, full of unfulfilled dreams remains a silent plea for resolution. Her killer may have escaped earthly justice, but the world refuses to let her memory be forgotten. As the years have passed, the Black Dahlia case has evolved from a simple unsolved murder into a haunting, almost mythical narrative woven into the fabric of American culture. Elizabeth Short is no longer just a victim, she has become a symbol of the tragic intersection between fame, exploitation, and death. Elizabeth Short's tragic story took root in the public consciousness, not because of the mystery of her death, but because of the narrative constructed around her life. The media, hungry for drama, portrayed her as the perfect victim, beautiful, ambitious, flawed, and ultimately doomed. Her name. The Black Dahlia was coined by the press, invoking images of the dahlia flower, symbolizing beauty, but with dark, twisted undertones of violence and death. This name became synonymous with the crime and gradually overshadowed her real identity. In many ways, Elizabeth Short's murder created the archetype of the tragic beauty, a young woman whose life was cut short by a ruthless killer, whose personal struggles and ambition became part of the dark lore surrounding her death. The public and later generations would latch on to this image, turning her into a kind of tragic, glamorous ghost, her story a cautionary tale of the price of fame and desire. The Black Dahlia case stands as one of the first examples of how media exploitation can distort a tragedy. By focusing on sensational details, Elizabeth's party girl persona, her multiple failed relationships, and her supposed involvement with various men, the press transformed her death from a brutal murder to a morbid spectacle. The investigation became more about creating a narrative than solving a crime. The LAPD, overwhelmed by the media circus, struggled to focus on evidence while constantly battling the false leads and wild rumors spread by journalists. Elizabeth Short's life was dissected to the smallest detail, yet her true nature, a young woman with dreams of stardom, trying to make a life for herself, was often lost beneath the layers of myth and sensationalism. This media-driven focus on her mysterious life overshadowed the very real human tragedy at the center of it all. The myth of the Black Dahlia has since been reimagined and re-explored in countless books, films, TV shows, and even music. Each retelling adds new layers to the mystery, blending facts with fiction to create a narrative that's as haunting as it is captivating. The Black Dahlia, 2006, directed by Brian De Palma, is one of the most famous cinematic adaptations of the case. Based on James Ellroy's novel, the film explores the intertwined lives of two LAPD detectives investigating the murder, with a fictionalized take on Elizabeth Short's life and death. TV shows such as American Horror Story, Hotel 2015, also paid homage to the Black Dahlia, incorporating elements of the case into the show's eerie narrative. These portrayals continue to romanticize and distort Elizabeth's death, offering a thrilling but tragic story for viewers to consume. James Ellroy's The Black Dahlia, 1987, part of his LA Quartet, was a major bestseller that cemented the Black Dahlia's place in popular culture. Ellroy's novel, though fictionalized, is known for its gritty, noir-style portrayal of the case and its characters. Other authors and researchers have continued to write about Elizabeth Short, each adding their theories, ideas, and interpretations of the crime. The Black Dahlia Murder, a death metal band, named themselves after the infamous case. The band's music, dark and often violent in tone, draws inspiration from the myth and horror surrounding Elizabeth's story. These works, however, often blur the line between reality and fiction, creating a narrative in which Elizabeth Short is transformed from a victim of violence into a tragic figure worthy of mythological reverence. One of the most uncomfortable truths about the Black Dahlia case is the glorification of Elizabeth's tragic end. By turning her story into a mystery to be solved, or worse, a spectacle to be consumed, we run the risk of dehumanizing her. The real Elizabeth Short was not a plot point in a book or a character in a film. She was a woman with aspirations, flaws, and potential, all of which were tragically stolen from her. Her murder should not be reduced to mere entertainment or fodder for artistic exploration. The obsession with her death can, at times, serve to obscure the fact that she was a victim, a woman murdered and discarded by someone who likely went on to live a normal life. Despite the ongoing mysteries, the legacy of the Black Dahlia remains profound. It highlighted the dangers of celebrity culture and the often destructive obsession with beauty and fame. It redefined true crime, shifting it from a mere genre of interest to an all-consuming cultural phenomenon. It brought attention to the fragile nature of life and how easily someone could slip from obscurity to the forefront of a nationwide tragedy. While Elizabeth Short was never able to fulfill her dreams, her story became a cautionary tale that still haunts us today. Her name, Black Dahlia, will forever be associated with the shadows of Hollywood, the city of dreams where both stardom and destruction are just a step apart.